Come on in and get seated. Please come on in and get seated. We will start in just a moment. All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all so much for being here. My name is Rob Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Multicultural Affairs here at Sacred Heart University, and welcome to the 2024 annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration, which is now a part of our Sacred Heart University tradition and our commitment to inclusive excellence. 38 years ago, our country saw fit to recognize Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a federal holiday. This day was established to remember Dr. King's legacy, sacrifice, and commitment to the civil rights movement. Every year, in preparation for this event, and in doing my own reflection and research of Dr. King and those who fought for our freedoms, I often listen to various speeches from my ancestors. This year, during my prep time, I stumbled upon a message from Dr. King I hadn't heard before titled, Rediscovering Lost Values. In this particular speech, he mentioned the road we embark on in our journey of human morality. He explained how in order to go forward as a people, as a community, and as a society, we must first go back to our roots of ethical discernment. Dr. King wasn't just a civil rights leader, he was a living embodiment and pioneer on moral authority for more than just Black civil rights. This gave me an even deeper appreciation for his dedication to equality, social justice, and service to those who exist on the fringes of our society, fighting to be seen and heard. As we engage in today's event, I invite you all to reflect on the values you'll need to rediscover to help continue the fight for equity in our society. In acknowledging this, the Office for Inclusive Excellence has decided that this year's theme for MLK Day is It Starts With Me, What Meaningful Change Requires. This can be defined as our individual journey to engage in creating the space for change and equality at a personal level. In the Office for Inclusive Excellence, our motto is that we are stronger together, and indeed we are, but we cannot grow together until we analyze our individual commitment to the cause. In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. through this year's theme, the Office for Inclusive Excellence has invited a very, very special guest and Sacred Heart pioneer to join us in remembering the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who we'll hear from later on in today's program. And now, in the spirit of the fight and causes championed by Dr. King, I invite all of those who are able and willing to please rise for the singing of Lift Every Voice and Sing, also known as the Black National Anthem, by two of our students from the Multicultural Center, juniors Annabelle Titus and Sydney Roundtree. Lyrics are found on the back of your programs, and immediately following this anthem, we'll hear words from our fearless leader and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Mr. Maurice Nelson. Again, thank you all for being here, and take it away, ladies.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers died. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past till no one's land at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in thy path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, where we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Good afternoon. Let's give Sydney and Annabelle another round of applause, please, for that performance. So often referred to as the Black National Anthem, this song, Lift Every Voice and Sing, was actually written as a hymn written as a poem by NAACP leader James Weldon Johnson, and that was done in 1900. And his brother, John Johnson, composed the music for the lyrics. And a choir of 500 or so school children at the segregated Stanton High School, which is where James Weldon Johnson was the president, performed the song in public in Jacksonville, Florida, to celebrate President Lincoln's birthday. And at the turn of the 20th century, Johnson's lyrics eloquently captured the solemn yet hopeful appeal for the liberty of Black Americans. And set against religious invocation of God and the promise of freedom, the song was later adopted by the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and was prominently used as a rallying cry during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. And at a place like Sacred Heart, where faith and reason coexist and social justice is the bedrock upon which we are anchored, this anthem is ever important. And I spent several years of my life heavily involved in NAACP leadership, so I find it important that we honor the importance of that song through both performance and also acknowledging and understanding some of its history. I do want to take a moment to thank the entire Inclusive Excellence team, and by name, I do want to acknowledge Ann Burmeister, our Director of Equity Compliance and Support, Kyle Humphreys, the newest member of our team and Manager of LGBTQ Affairs, Dr. Lee Morgan, who works as our Director of Inclusive Excellence Education, Edwin Maxwell, our Inclusive Excellence Graduate Assistants, and our Multicultural Affairs team who organized this event, Executive Director Rob Johnson, Assistant Director Felicia Jeter, and Kamoya Walters, our graduate assistant, our team of student employees, our Inclusive Excellence Fellows, and I also want to acknowledge even our Inclusive Excellence Advisory Council and Bias Education Support Team who give of their time to support and advance inclusive excellence here at Sacred Heart University. So let's give the entire team a round of applause for their work. Thank you, thank you. Inclusive excellence is really robust and arduous work, so I take that time to honor them and to acknowledge them because I'm honored to have such an amazing team of people with me on this journey. Dr. King, Reverend Dr. King was and is many things to different people, but to me, he's been an inspiration to both my personal and professional work and leadership. Dr. King is also my fraternity brother, so I glean from him inspiration on how to be the best member and brother of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. But as we engage with the rest of the program and the words from our guest speaker and SHU alum, Aisha Lo, I challenge each person here to think about what his work means to you and how that shows up and guides you throughout your journey toward inclusive excellence, our journey. But remember, MLK was a Black radical, anti-imperialist, revolutionary Christian internationalist who was deemed an enemy of the state and assassinated for his radical work. So while I'm not asking you to be a martyr for social justice, I do want to be clear that real effort will be uncomfortable and challenging. Rob Johnson shared that our theme is It Starts With Me, What Meaningful Change Requires, which calls attention to our individual responsibilities to advance inclusive excellence by moving from paper to action and putting our money where our mouths are, both figuratively and literally. Thank you to all the students, to all the faculty, staff, alums, and community members for your participation in this program. Thank you to the many senior staff colleagues who joined us, participate, and stay committed to our pursuit for inclusive excellence. I invite you all to enjoy the rest of the program and the post-event reception. And thank you for engaging with us as we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Enjoy, and at this time, I would like to welcome Dr. Petrillo to provide his remarks. Thank you.
Aisha, thank you for being here. Good to see the light. Thank you very much for being here. And I'm just going to acknowledge the two young ladies. They sing in gospel choir with me, and they did a great job. They left already, but I'll get them later for that. They did a wonderful job. Just a few words. Today's theme struck me, and it's on the program. It starts with me, what a meaningful change requires. Change is a very common word, used often as a throwaway. It implies modify or alter. Yet we gather today, I would suggest that change calls for something different, a transformation, a rebirth. We gather to celebrate Martin, his life, his teachings, his actions. It was a life of service to God and his people that evolved through lived experiences and reflections. In a similar manner, we need to understand that as we call for change, we are really calling for transformation within ourselves. A commitment to reflect on our core beliefs, our language, our actions. Awareness is first necessary, and only then can acceptance be substantive for meaningful change. It is upon us to become aware of the injustices we allow, tolerate, and even perpetuate before we can truly accept meaningful change within ourselves. Change is a journey each of us should be eager to travel as it opens up horizons of discovery from within ourselves. I can only strongly suggest that each of us not waste our lives living in fear of growth, discovery, or change itself. Ask ourselves, are we inclusive of others? Are we inclusive of others because of race, religion, or orientation? Are we frightened to embrace those who are different? Are we, in fact, are we simply unsure of ourselves? What meaningful change requires? Let us not be prisoners of ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice and Dr. Petrillo, for your remarks. My name is Felicia Jeter, and I am the Assistant Director of Multicultural Affairs, and I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. Aisha Lo is the Chief Diversity Officer at Draper Laboratories. She has more than 15 years of experience in strategizing and implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI programs. She was appointed to her current position in 2022. In collaboration with fellow Draper leaders, Aisha is responsible for developing policy, practices, and programs that advance DEI at the company, as well as initiatives with external partners. Aisha's experience in advising on and coordinating DEI initiatives for previous employers have been based on vision of inclusive excellence for each company. With the goal of systemic change, she has taken collaborative approaches to management and problem solving and establishing and integrating efforts across the companies. Before Draper, Aisha worked in the advertisement industry. She served as the Vice President of Talent Engagement and Inclusion for Publicis Group, where she worked at for 8 years. Aisha graduated with a BA in Business Administration from Sacred Heart University and received an MBA from Curry College. She has subsequently completed a Diversity and Inclusion Certificate at Cornell University in 2018. She is also a certified executive and leadership coach, mental health first aider, as well as a qualified administrator for the Intercultural Development Inventory. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Aisha Lo.
Good afternoon, Sacred Heart. Dr. Petrillo, Maurice, Robert, faculty, staff, alumni, and students, thank you all for the invitation and welcoming me back here to Sacred Heart. It's been an honor to be part of this assembly honoring Dr. King, and I want to thank you, Felicia, for that wonderful introduction. You know, there's always that one person that starts a meeting with an icebreaker, and that person is usually me. So one fun fact about me is Sacred Heart University is the only college that I applied to. And I did that at early decision. So when I came down the fall of 2002, I fell in love with the campus and I knew that this is the place that had to be for me. The rest is history, as they say. I met my husband in Holly Lounge. I found the greatest sisters here at my sorority that I pledged, and my line sister is here today. I met some of the best friends here at 5151 Park Avenue, to the point that some of us came back over the weekends. 2 other shoe couples, so the 6 of us all met here. We all got married, and with 9 kids in tow, we toured the campus, and we went up to the hockey game. It was a tough loss to Bentley in overtime, but we had a remarkable time, and it was just such an honor to see how Sacred Heart has evolved and grown since we've all been here last. So again, thank you. So when Robert had reached out to see if I might be interested in taking part in today's programming, he shared the theme, which it starts with me, shifting the cultural climate through study and practice of Kingian nonviolence. And I had to reflect on that and how it applied to my life and how others could do the same. This resonated with me subconsciously because it starts with me, has driven me forward in various spaces in my life. if it was petitioning the Sisters of St. Joseph to allow girls to wear pants to school, or running for office in my town, or holding senior leaders accountable to complete a pay equity study, I had to find the resolve to say, it starts with me. I am the daughter of Haitian immigrants who taught me the value of hard work, altruism, and faith, and the goal was always for us to do more with what they sacrificed for us. The other part of the theme, which is poignant for today, is the idea of study and practice. In our always-on world, there's a sense of urgency for all things to be done quickly so we can move on. But for something to have lasting change, it needs to be done thoughtfully and intentionally. And Dr. King knew that he had to build a strong message and platform to help move our nation forward. Maurice touched on this earlier, but Dr. King's reputation in the 60s, from where we are today, has been a bit sanitized, right, as the decades go on. I want to remind you all, as he did, that Dr. King was considered a radical figure who was watched by the FBI, who was considered a national security threat, and he always had the opportunity of driving and changing the status quo. So thinking about his words, who here has heard of the I Have a Dream speech? Yes. I have been to the mountaintop? Yes. Or read the letter from the Birmingham jail? Yes, all right. Those are only 3 instances of the over 2,500 speeches Dr. King gave throughout his life. And while I knew anecdotally Dr. King wasn't well received at the time, looking at research from the Pew Research poll, throughout the mid-60s, Black Americans had a much more favorable view of Dr. King than white Americans did. In May of 1963, a Gallup survey conducted, for example, gave 92% of Black Americans, but only 35% of white Americans had a favorable opinion of our civil rights leader. Today, polls will show the complete opposite, right? We are all appreciative and understand the work that was done, but I caution us not to diminish the work and fully appreciate the messaging and the call to action that he had given through his life. From the day he was born, Dr. King knew he was on an accelerated timeline, as if he knew he had to make the most out of every year. He was a gifted and anointed man who began college at 15, became an ordained minister at 19, got married at 24, that's what we have in common, and by 26, he was on the front lines of social and racial justice. 8 years later, at 34, he had received a Nobel Peace Prize. Extremely impressive, and the true definition of extraordinary. And what I find interesting about when you think about Dr. King and other people who were born at the same time as him, Barbara Walters, Anne Frank, Arnold Palmer, Berry Gordy, I hope some of these names are resonating, Jackie O, Kennedy, and Audrey Hepburn, they're all in Technicolor in my mind. For some reason, we sometimes choose to portray Dr. King in likeness in black and white to imply that this something happened a long time ago. And I remember US history in elementary school had about 2 chapters, one about enslaved people and one about Dr. King. However, research and information are so much more accessible from when I was in school by looking up books with the Dewey Decimal System and opening an Encyclopedia Britannica, which all might be foreign tools to many of the students now. However, the knowledge for us to understand where we go and how we move forward is right here in our pockets. George Santana originally wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Therefore, we cannot take for granted the lessons learned by previous generations that will inform us on how to build and continue down the path of equality for all. And I bet some of you were thinking, I'm a student, I'm a parent, I'm a caregiver, I'm working full-time, how can I be like Dr. King? And this is where you must ask yourself, where can something start with me? Looking at where we are today, from the racial reckoning of 2020 to kind of the racial reversal we're seeing in 2024, we must continue to do the work of Dr. King, albeit in different ways. We must find our individual ways to create change, and that will look different for all of us, and that's the power and the diversity of this work. My It Starts With Me probably comes from having been heavily involved on campus. I was the VP of Greek Life. I was a resident assistant, I was a student senator, I was in show choir, I was the concert chair. There wasn't many roles that I would not apply for because I just had so much fun giving back to the community. So when I ran for office in 2015, that same energy was coursing through me as my son turned 1. I felt disconnected from what was happening in my town, where my taxes were being applied, and so I launched a write-in campaign for town council, and I won with 63 votes, thank you, and was reelected for a second term. I was the 3rd woman ever elected to the town of Bridgewater and the first Black person to fill that role. And during my time being on an all-male board, I had to find my voice to be able to speak up about things that I didn't believe were in the best interest of the town or my district overall. There were folks on the board who were born and raised in town and had much more experience than me, yet I had to come into the room with confidence and make decisions that were focused on our future. During my time on council, I was able to work on getting more funding for our public schools, cleaner water by voting for a new water treatment plant, and welcomed many great new small businesses into town, and so much more over my 6 years. When launching that campaign, I had to find the resolve to say, it starts with me. Dr. King knew that he couldn't do this work alone, and surrounded himself with strong peers in the work. Some names that come to mind were the men who made up the Big Six, which included James Farmer, Dr. King, U.S. Senator or Representative John Lewis, A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, and Whitney Young. There were also many women involved, but got less fanfare due to sexism. People like Dorothy Height must have had the resolve to say, it starts with me. She worked alongside Dr. King and became the president of the National Council for Negro Women in 1957, and under her leadership, the organization supported voter registration efforts in the South, funded activists all over the country, and in addition to her work with the NCNW, she also worked with the YWCA for over 40 years. Her advocacy led to improved conditions for Black workers, and ultimately, she helped assist with the national level of integration policy. Height passed away at the young age of 98 in Washington, D.C., but not before earning the Presidential Medal of Freedom and being called the godmother of the Civil Rights Act by President Obama. She embodied change with what she wanted to see and had the resolve to know that it started with her. So this year, as we should every year, we will head to the polls to cast our vote on local, state, and national levels. While these national elections bring out a large number of voters, I encourage everyone to stay connected to what's happening within your state and local communities. Those elections have the largest impact on your day-to-day, and many times have the lowest voter turnout. Many towns have dedicated elected officials, town employees, and volunteer, but you must be part of the conversation. Take the first step and head to a meeting, ask questions, and have your personal stake in your community. The same is true for workplace or campus diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. They will only work when it becomes the work of everyone within the ecosystem. It can't rest at the feet of your senior leaders or the small but mighty diversity team. It must be in the daily actions that are fostered through an inclusive environment where each person within that space, regardless of their backgrounds, are valued for their contribution. Dr. King once said, and that is, although it may be true that morality may not be legislated, behavior can be regulated. And even though it may be true that laws cannot change hearts, it can restrain the harvest. Even though it may be true that law cannot make a man love me, it can restrain him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important also. And while the law may not change the hearts of men, it can and does change the habits of men. And when you begin to change the habits of men, pretty soon the attitudes will be changed. Pretty soon the hearts will be changed. And a crucial point that I want to highlight in that quote is that throughout our history, bigotry and racism, however, were legislated for a lot of his lifetime. Jim Crow, housing covenants, job discrimination. At each turn, people of color were turned away from lawfully from opportunities to advance. In Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, he outlines how local, state, and federal governments work together to exclude people of color from funding and housing and communities. So when we discuss systemic racism, this is what is meant. It's not that we believe everyone within an institution is racist, but the institution itself was built with exclusionary mindset that we all must work to dismantle to allow it for work for all. Something else that worries me is apathy within our society. Perhaps it's because we went from latchkey kids to helicopter parents, or perhaps we're just overtired, overwhelmed, and overworked just to provide for ourselves and our families. But there's an illusion that there will be time to fix it down the road. Or better yet, there are folks that others voted into office that will take care of it for us. During Dr. King's speech titled The Other America, he says, "I think there's an answer to that myth. And it's that time is neutral. It can either be used constructively or destructively. And I am absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation and the extremists in our nation have often used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. And it may well be that we have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words of bad people and the violent actions of bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of good people, who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere, we must come to see that social progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through tireless efforts and persistent work of resolute individuals, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally to the primitive forces of social stagnation. And so, we must have time, and we must realize that the time is always right to do what's right. Meaningful change doesn't happen with one hashtag or one event. It requires all of us to participate and engage and on all levels to bring about what change is needed. It takes every single one of us to act at home, at work, or school to continue us fighting towards inclusion. We always need to be asking who is missing, what could be better, and who will not be served by our decisions. In Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Cost Everyone and How We Can Prosper, she gives us the examples of public pools at the time when Dr. King's work was most prevalent. Many towns had public pools that were for use for everyone. However, when desegregation became required, towns felt it was better to fill the pools with concrete than allow for people of color to swim. So not only did that affect people of color, it also took away a public amenity for white children as well. So inclusion is not a zero-sum game, nor is it pie. Dr. King spent years and years advocating for basic human rights and dignities that we see outlined in our founding documents: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you're not the type of person who sees themselves at the front line of a protest, perhaps you can be a consistent volunteer at a shelter for the unhoused. Or maybe you feel the best way to contribute is to donate funds monthly to a cause that means something for you. While we all cannot be at the front lines in the center, Dr. King knew that there is more power in numbers, that surrounded himself with phenomenal people who were willing to do what they could to foster and bring about necessary change. So as my favorite Broadway show, Hamilton, states, this is not a moment, it's a movement. So we all have to find the time and the resolve to say, it starts with me. Thank you.
Can we give Aisha another huge round of applause really quickly? That was really, really good. Now we're shifting into our fireside chat portion of today's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration. Of course, I have my scripted questions, but your remarks, your keynote made me think of so many different things that I think could really benefit the entire community, especially you being a Sacred Heart pioneer yourself, touring the campus, going to the hockey game, and being fully immersed in what we do here. So I'd like to ask my first question, and it's of the many philosophies and teachings from Dr. King, which ones has been the most important to your growth and fight for equity, and how do you aim to implement said teachings in all that you do?
Yes. So that's a great question. As you mentioned, I went to Sacred Heart, and I struggled to find my way on my major, right? So I started as a philosophy major, and then I became a psychology major, and then I was a social work major, and then I decided business was the right place for me. And within business, there was HR, and within HR, there was teaching and training and connecting with people, and so that is what led me to do that. And so thinking about Dr. King's philosophies, it's really about being with the people, empowering people, giving people voice. Being a chief diversity officer, my role is not just to work on racial issues. There's a whole gamut of inclusion and diversity. Sexual orientation, gender expression, disability, veteran status, socioeconomics. I didn't say my pronouns, by the way, they are she, her. And so these are things that Dr. King felt so strongly about, especially around the economic pieces. So when I talk about pay equity, we know that there's pay gaps, and we know that there are things that institutionally have been set. And so while, I'm in a corporate office sending off emails, there's a lot of that work that still shows up every day.
I like that a lot, and I know Maurice is smiling over there and discussing the various aspects of diversity that come with whether it be leading a diversity office or being that sole person to be looked to for those answers. So my next question is, we're almost 4 years removed from a very, very pivotal time in our country, which you mentioned during your keynote. Do you feel like, or do you see Dr. King's dream still within our reach? And if so, what are some of the things that make you hopeful that that his dream is within reach?
Yeah, if you would have asked me that a couple weeks ago when Dr. Gaze had to resign from Harvard, I would have said it's looking bleak. But I know that was just a moment, and that there's so much more power in the people, like Dr. King has said, that the good are going to move forward. I believe this is just a season of time, and when you look at history, justice does prevail. I think what's really most important now is that we don't give in or give up, that we stay cued in and listening and participating and asking questions and challenging kind of the status quo, because that is what brings it forward. And so working with our employee resource groups, working with my senior leadership team, and seeing their resolve, seeing the community of people that I work with kind of still doubling down on this work, gives me the hope that this is just a season, and that we will continue to do the right things for people, because that is what this work is about.
So you mentioned your different examples of meaningful change, and some of them were from your student perspective and professional perspective. But we do have we have full classes here as well. So hello.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming, and for professors bringing your class. What were some of those things or those moments for you as a student that sparked for you to create meaningful change within the Sacred Heart community?
Absolutely. So the sorority I was in was a multicultural sorority, and so we had opportunities for me to learn about different people. I went to predominantly white schools from pre-K until I finished here at Sacred Heart, and then Curry. And so I had an opportunity to learn about different people from different regions. And really what drove the inclusion pieces was being part of student life, being active in the community, going to events, learning more about the people that may look like me but have completely different stories. And that's something that's so important, that none of us are homogenous. All of us have different experiences. And so really having that opportunity to be on campus and to interface with so many different folks, working with Dean Wilk and Denise, which was so scary at the time, and working with public safety every time I got a ticket. There was a lot of great opportunities for me to practice my professionalism, to practice my abilities to speak up for myself. And so all of those things kind of continued to mature me and let me grow on a path.
So when we talk about, the idea of, meaningful change and, what's required of it, often for me at least, I think, of sacrifice, right? Of I lose something so that someone else could potentially gain something else, and I'm okay with that, right? Knowing the history of our country, knowing the landscape of our society. So how do we get beyond this idea of thinking that whatever efforts we're going to put forth to create equity for different groups is going to be convenient.
Well, convenience isn't what this work is about, right? And so when you're thinking about kind of that pie mentality that I have to give something up, or if we do a pay equity study, someone's going to come take $20 out of my pocket to give it to you. That's not what happens. Really, what happens is the high tide floats all boats. So if we're breaking down barriers for women, for people of color, for the LGBTQIA+, that is going to rise the tide for everyone to have better experiences. And so when you are thinking about your own participation in this work, you will have to give up something: time, money, effort. Sometimes being comfortable. This work is sometimes uncomfortable, but that is so needed for growth. If you are always comfortable, nothing will ever grow. And so you have to be able to put yourself out there safely and do what you can within your sphere of influence, which is also something that's very important. Think about what you can have an impact on today, and then go for that. You not necessarily need to start writing the president, which is helpful, and you can as a right and a citizen of the United States, but what's happening right next to you that you could make a change on today? And I think that is something that folks will have to be comfortable with, but there's so many opportunities available to us that we should never feel like it's a give and take.
I'm going to quote you here a little bit, a little bit.
Remind me what I said.
So you said during your keynote, the appalling silence and indifference of good people, which that hit home. How do we get people to avoid this sense of bystander behavior? I'm an FYE instructor, and I'm sure there's other FYE instructors out there, and we talk about bystander intervention or behavior or whatever the case is. How do we get people to avoid that kind of behavior or those actions, and empower them to speak up when they see something that they just know it isn't right?
So I'm not sure what your bystander workshop looks like, but ones that we do within corporate, there's active bystanding, right? And there are 5 different Ds, and now that I'm on the spot, I'm not going to remember them all.
It's okay.
Deflect, document, disrupt, distract, and the 5th one is
Delegate.
Delegate. Thank you.
Yeah, I pay attention, Denise, I promise.
See? That was a quiz and you passed. But that's what you do. And out of those 5 different models, there's an opportunity for you to still have an impact while thinking about your safety, right? Because sometimes it's not going to feel safe for you to do. So maybe you come after and you check on the person after, or you document it and say, hey, I took this video of what happened, and you give it directly to the person. You don't put it on, the Twitter, or the X or the Instagram. You give it to the person, right? We're not looking to go viral. That's someone's life and that's someone's experience, and you want to give them the autonomy to do with what they think should be done with it. And so when we're seeing things, you're going to feel the hair on your neck, rise, and you're going to feel the nervous sweats, but know that whatever intervention model that you decide to take, it will have an impact on that person, and they will carry that forward. Not the other day, or however long ago, because time is relative, I was at a pharmacy getting medication, and the person asked me if I had enough money to pay for it. And so I looked at that person, and I had to make a decision on what was going to happen. And at the pharmacy, for those that go, there's always a line. And so there was no active bystander thing there, but there was clearly a bias put on me. And so I just kind of moved on and kind of made my own kind of plan. But there's always going to be those uncomfortable situations, and it's really up to the person or our resolve to go ahead and be helpful and to move through the discomfort.
So going back to our theme, right? It starts with me. In your own journey, what were some of the steps you've taken to persist through continuing equity work and spotlighting historically excluded groups, even when you kind of started to lose maybe the energy for it?
Yeah. I had great teams, great people, and great leadership to partner with. I always find ways to make myself be heard. I think of myself as a wallflower, but other people will disagree. But you have to be persistent and consistent. And so throughout my time, how I got into this work, I was an employee resource group leader. For those that don't know what employee resource groups is, different affinity groups that come together to do programming, advocacy within corporate spaces. And so my first foray into this work was in our women's ERG. And that's when we started the pay equity. And that's when we started to call out equal pay day. And then we talked about all the other equal pay days for Black women and for Hispanic women and for mothers and all of these different things that I did not realize until I started to drive the work forward. And so really being able to have the education and being able to have my voice be heard is something that I've been doing, and then formalizing this. Because, 10 years ago, 11 years ago when I started this work, 12 years ago when I started this work, math is not my strong suit, it was about gender equality. And as the years gone on, we've been able to have much more deeper conversations, and as of 2020, we're really kind of opened the box to talk about a lot of things that we weren't able to talk about before. And so really seizing that moment and talking to people about what's going on and asking them what their accountability plans are and what are they doing to make change, and having, those check-ins, that's what drives the work forward, and that's what I try to do each day. It's part of my job, which is a beautiful thing about having a chief diversity job, but also having a team that is held accountable for the work as well.
So to follow up on that a little bit, so you mentioned being obviously a chief diversity and inclusion officer. What are some of those maybe highs and lows in your role where you have to find that recharge
Yes.
to be reinvigorated to get back to maybe the ground roots of why you're here and why you're still fighting the good fight?
Yes, I had someone tell me on a Zoom, so to my face, if they knew how to talk to Black people, they would never hire me. And that was a moment where I had to, it completely depleted me, and I had to take a step back. When things were happening, if you remember the grocery store shooting in Buffalo, I had reached out to the leadership team and asked, who's gonna write the email? The response was, can you do it? And that same weekend, I did not go to the grocery store because I was afraid. And so I think what practitioners have to remind themselves of, and also people who work with those practitioners, this work doesn't have an on and off switch. It happens 9 to 5, but then for the other hours, things do affect us. And so having the team give you the grace and the space and the understanding that it could be hard and that people have to take the burden on and carry the load with you, I think is very important. But those are some of the challenges that I have faced. But then, I'm reminded by the other people, by our employees, that the work still needs to get done. But when you have that affronted in your face, it can get hard, but it starts with me, and so I can't let things keep me down for too long.
So you touched upon some of Dr. King's, radical, comments or ideologies during the times, obviously when he was alive and most prevalent in our society. What are some of your favorite, moments of radical MLK? Because we don't talk about him often, as you said.
Absolutely. And doing the research for today, and, again, the 2,500 speeches, I was, knowing about 12 of them, right? And so thinking about and I'm going to forget the name of the park, but when he walked through and he got hit by a rock and he continued to walk and be with his people and did not cower away, I don't know if I could do that. Mm-hmm. And when he walked across, Selma of the bridge, and everyone is in suits and they're holding themselves up with the highest level of dignity and being assaulted in that way, it's a power that, he carried himself and brought so many people through, and that is what I try to remind myself of. So when I have those, moments of feeling defeated, I think back about what he had went through, and thinking about his wife, who was also on the front lines doing the work right alongside him, his children, and thinking about my own children. Like my daughter fell off a stair, and I'm like, okay, everything has to be padded. We can't do anything. Like, everything has to be safe, and he's out here literally risking his life and ultimately having it be taken away for the work. And so at 39, which is the age I am now, He was a very, very young person, as am I. And so we have to think through and remind ourselves of the sacrifices that he went through and the pain and the suffering that he felt. That can never be forgotten, and it always has to be appreciated today and every day.
So, what are some of your own personal philosophies you'd like to share with students, faculty and staff, of course, about how to embark on a journey of creating that intentional space for those that are a part of historically excluded communities?
Absolutely. I think what's really important, and I think what happens a lot, is that when you're in kind of school systems, you see everybody, there's a familiarity of people that are different than you. But what really drives that home is when they're actually at your home. Have you broken bread with people? Have you fully understood their stories? Have you been able to understand kind of their experiences? I'll never forget when I was out with some of my high school friends who were predominantly white, and I explained to them the internal monologue that goes in through my head as I move through different spaces. Can I say this thing? If I'm going to challenge this person, are they going, how is my voice? How do I have to code switch to keep myself safe? And so as you're thinking about how you're doing this work, think about, as walking a mile in someone else's shoes, thinking about the experiences, but really finding the time to make a meaningful connection with other people that are different than you. And that could be, again, the gamut is so wide open about what that means and what that looks like. But for this work to really be mindful and for you to really make the change, you have to understand kind of the ecosystem that you're working with and have a personal connection to it. And so I recommend that you all sit down and learn more about people. It's not always up to the people from marginalized groups to educate. And so taking time to read, understand the history, to spend time kind of reflecting on your own journey and how some of these things were made up for you and why the stories you tell yourself seem to be true, and confront that with the facts that are available to us to learn more about.
This is my last and final question.
Okay, great.
Okay. So what is one of your favorite, I guess, shoe experiences as a student that I don't that again it made you want to stay here and keep fighting that good fight, to your point?
Oh my goodness. Again, I loved my time here. If it was like game nights in this theater and we would have like bingo or slingo or all the things, staying on campus, everything happening after 10:10, if that's still a thing.
Kind of, not really.
It's hard to pick one. Being the concert chair for Black Eyed Peas and the Pussycat Dolls was really fun. Seeing Nicole down in the pit center, like on an elliptical, and I'm running around in a green T-shirt. Having Greek night here and stepping with my sisters or doing all the different activities. Being part of student government. The student government committee or cohort I was with created Big Red. You all don't know Bucky.
I kind of do a little bit.
But if you go back into the archives,
Yes.
you could see who was getting our spirit going. And so those are some of the things that stand out, seeing, and that was something that we talked about. I was with other student government folks here. Their names are on the plaque in the hallway. You can make a real lasting change, right? Seeing Big Red, having all of you feel that school excitement, like that's what we wanted, and to see it persevering 17, almost 20 years later, is impactful. So I welcome all of you to really be involved, to feel like you left your mark. My name's on a brick by the new bookstore. I don't know what that building is called.
By the new bookstore. Oh,
it's new. It's new to me. The bookstore used to be right near.
Linda's
building, yes. For you all. I need a map. But those are the things. Is really kind of having my mark here, to literally have my name stamped outside, is something that will always bring my heart back to Sacred Heart.
Well, Aisha, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to travel all the way down here.
No problem.
And sharing your experiences with the campus community. And yes, please join us. In the next few minutes, we will have a reception where you can meet with obviously myself, the staff, and Aisha, but we will have some closing remarks in just a few by our amazing graduate assistant, Ms. Kamoya Walters. So let's give Aisha a round of applause and thank her.
Distinguished guests and participants, I would like to thank you on behalf of the Office for Inclusive Excellence and the Multicultural Affairs team for your attendance. I am pleased to make a few closing remarks and express our gratitude to all who made this event possible. Thank you to our incredible keynote speaker, Aisha Lo, for your insightful and illuminating words. As we come together to celebrate the life and legacy of an incredible man who shaped and reimagined the landscape of our country, we are reminded of the power of the human mind. Reverend King reminds us we can make meaningful change and do great things. In a 1957 speech in Montgomery, Alabama, Reverend King said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" 66 years later, and this sentiment rings truer than ever. Reverend King knew that the struggle for justice and equality depended on our collective service to others. This afternoon's theme is, "It Starts With Me," what meaningful change requires. As we leave here today, remember Reverend King's words and ask ourselves these questions. What am I doing for others? How am I giving back to my community? How can I be of service to others? Sometimes that's all the change that is required. One person doing one small action that can have a massive ripple effect. I invite all of you to join us for refreshments in the Edgerton Art Atrium as we continue our celebration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy. Thank you all.